Whoosh, a new face. A new face has joined us in the Mind of Mansion program with Ian Miller, one of our newest, best, brightest writers, analysts at Player Profiler. You're on the big program now, Ian. You've made it.
Yeah, I made it to the big leagues, so thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited for this.
When did you first start paying attention to Player Profiler? Do you remember?
Yeah, I mean, Mind of Mansion in particular, I was introduced when you and Nate would go back and forth on Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Jonathon Taylor. I mean, those were the introduction days to me. And I mean, now that I'm on here, it does kind of feel surreal for how much I was really enjoying those early episodes.
Well, you have to, in hindsight, right? It was clearly the right move for us to just keep, because remember, there were other rookies that year. There were a lot of other rookies that year. That was an exciting year, right? That was J.K. Dobbins, Cam Akers. There was a lot of fun players that year. A lot. Okay? And we just fixated on this one dichotomy of these two guys because I just couldn't let it go because it had been everything that I had ever learned about fantasy encapsulated in these two guys, of the types of guys that I fucking hated and the types of guys I fucking loved, right? And one guy had one season of production in college. One guy had two 2,000-yard seasons. One guy landed in the dream spot. One guy landed in a rebuilding spot. And all the things that I tried to focus on in Dynasty were encapsulated in Jonathon Taylor, and the things that I was always arguing against encapsulated in Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And Nate and I were talking about them, and then I realized, wait, I didn't know because we didn't prepare. We were just talking on the show. I was like, I couldn't believe it. Like, I'm like, you really are. I'm like, in real life, because this was the key to me. I was like, is this just rankings or like an analysis and just talking points? Or if you're in an actual draft, like this was the thing. I was like, in an actual draft, and you have the opportunity to get Jonathon Taylor, who to me was the quintessential workhorse back of the era. You would actually, I mean, you can talk and talk, but when you're in an actual draft, you're hitting the button on Clyde Edwards-Helaire that says draft over Jonathon Taylor when you have the option. You're actually picking this. No. And he assured me, and he showed me teams and drafts where and I was like, this is real? This is real? So I was like, man, we got to get into it. So to me, it was almost like trying to convince him that all the things that I've learned in the last 10 years matter.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me.
I was just very passionate. I really, really wanted to it was a hope that was a fleeting, impossible hope that he would maybe, at some point say, you know what? Okay, you got me. I've changed my mind. You're right. I mean, you know what? Next draft, I'm going Jonathon Taylor. And so every show would open up. And then the other thing is we would open up these shows with all these comments from the audience and emails we would get and tweets and all these things. And so we would start. And then the idea was that we would cover it and we would address it and make sure that we're engaging with the audience for the first 5 minutes of the show. And then there's every other player in fantasy. If you weren't around back then and you scroll through your podcast timeline and go check out those old shows. And you can go to pod.link and you can search for Sonic Truth, and you could subscribe just to the Sonic Truth podcast, and you can go back, and it's easier to go back if you just subscribe to Sonic Truth, and you can go back that way, as opposed to the player profiler feed, which just has a lot more shows. It would take a little longer to go back. But we're talking about like 3 or 4, it was at least a month of shows where to only talk about 2 players for the equivalent of 4 hours, that's a thing that happened.
I think it was a great thing that happened for your show and for everybody watching.
I couldn't believe it. Like when we were like, and he's like, can we move on? The whole thing was, can we move on? I'm like, yes, we're moving on. But we we have to, one more thing, but you're sure? And then he was always trying to move on, and I was always going right back to him. I had this impossible dream that I would be able to convince him that it was all about Jonathon Taylor. And I think to this day, like, I think that he's not happy about how it all played out, that maybe I sabotaged him. But you got to remember, I didn't know for sure. Right? And imagine my face, the look of my face. I was in Vegas at the FFPC main event, and Thursday Night Football, week 1, rookie year, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, he had like 28 fantasy points. It was his best game was his first week of his career. And I was like, oh, mother. I was like, those are 10 hours I'll never get back. You know, thinking, talking about Clyde Edwards-Helaire versus Jonathon Taylor. I was like, man, I'm so maybe wrong about this. This sucks. I don't like, this is terrible, right? It's like, I didn't know how it would all play out. And then and then also for the first 10 weeks of that season, Jonathon Taylor looked incompetent. Horrible. So I was like, trying to fight the urge to take L's, because I was like, I don't take L's, but man, I'm looking pretty bleak here. So if Nate feels that way now, there was a whole 6-month period where I was feeling like I was the one that was about to be embarrassed.
Well, you had to wait basically till that he played the Jaguars, and then they're like, oh, this Jonathon Taylor guy is really worth the 101, and then he just went on a run from there. 101 the next year.
I was so relieved. I mean, such a weight off my shoulders. But so for me, it was a different experience. Like for me, it was like this, 2 months of dread, and then this giant weight lifted. And then for Nate, it was like this, first few weeks of euphoria, and then just that feeling being chipped away slowly over the course of years, where there was hope, and then it was pulled back, and there was hope again, and it was pulled back. Totally different experience for him, where then, things start circling the drain after like 2 years. It took really for everyone to come to Jesus finally and be like, this is over. This guy's a bust. And then in every show, the chat would just light up with CEH. He goes on Twitter, his mentions, it's like Edwards-Helaire. And he's like, this isn't fun anymore, guys. This sucks. Can you leave me alone about this Clyde Edwards-Helaire? So, I think that time will eventually heal this. I didn't know Jonathon Taylor was going to be the 101 in seasonal leagues, very quickly. I didn't know how it was all going to play out. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm looking at my texts with Nate, and you can see that there's 4 texts here that have gone unresponded to. Let's live on air. I have my phone here. We're going to go ahead and text Nate right now. I'm going to write, hey, buddy, just reminiscing. How do you spell reminiscing? Oh, my God. I think I got it right the first time. Oh, my God, I got it right the first time. Just reminiscing about the pod. Give me a call. How's that? Is that good?
It's great.
Is that a good text, everybody? Let me know in the chat. Is that a good text? We're going to try to get... Again, everyone knows I've been trying to re-engage with Nate. I've had my agents and my agent provocateurs trying to get Nate to re-engage with us. Give me a call. Give me a call sometime. That's even a little bit softer. Give me a call sometime. All right, I did it. I just texted him again. That might be 5 or 6 unanswered texts, but being able texting him online while we're chatting here felt good. One day, man, one day. Tyler Knable, great text, best text. Thank you, everybody. I mean, I thought it was what I was thinking at the moment. I was thinking I was reminiscing, and I do want him to call me, so I just that's just what I said. So anyway, it's great to have new voices on the show. Theo Greminger, can't talk enough about him. He has very good things to say about you. And so what is another area where you've kind of dived in headfirst into fantasy football and you're just enjoying yourself?
Yeah, I mean, when I was done with college baseball, I was taking some computer programming classes, and I was learning through Excel, Python. I was like, oh, I feel like, because I play a bunch of fantasy football, I feel like I could start, making some models, really seeing what I can do here. And then it turned into
truly are a Josh Larkey disciple.
Yeah, I guess so. Just sitting through computer programming classes when I probably should have been, focusing on the subject that they were teaching. But I'm like, oh, what you're teaching me is working great in this model here that I'm working on. And I kind of just took off from there, started posting on Twitter. And I mean, stoked to see where I'm at. Made it to your pod. So I'd say in the big leagues now.
That's right. You're in the big leagues. But you didn't make it to the big leagues in baseball. So you were a baseball player?
Yeah, I was a baseball player. Now washed up beer league softball player.
What position, dude?
I pitched in college.
Okay, that's great. That's cool.
Yeah.
What was your? Did you have some nasty stuff or what?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like part of the reason that I didn't go as high as I wanted to was just didn't have the velo. I think I topped out at like 85, 86. More of a stuff guy from the left side, so one of those weird lefties. But now I'm the weird.
Wait, did you say that you meant velocity?
Yeah.
The velo. Is that what they in the biz? Is that what they call it? Velo?
Yeah, I remember I was playing with some guys who were throwing like 96, but they were giving up bombs. Like I had the better stats, but the guy with 96 was quick ride out of there to, Tennessee, Texas. We even had a guy get drafted by the Yankees with like a 4.5 ERA. I was like, oh man, if only I threw hard.
I know, but so you were just a straight up junk lefty.
Yeah, we'll call it that.
I love it. Dude, those guys have a part to play. How tall are you?
6 foot.
Well, if you were a little taller,
maybe.
Yeah, you could have got a little with the arm angle. We could have played around. Yeah. Maybe get a couple extra miles per hour. That's all. That's the thing. And because I talked to Cody Carpentier about this. Cody Carpentier is incredibly strong, and he's also an awesome athlete. But he's 6 foot, right? Just like you. And if he were 6'3", he could be in the NFL.
Yeah.
You see the difference? Like, that's all it is. He's like, I just wasn't big enough, to play on the line. I wasn't big, but I wasn't fast enough, to play over here. He was always a tweener in all these different places, and it was never going to happen. Just because and that's also the reason why they didn't recruit him. So it starts way back in high school where they have the measurements and they're like, this guy could be awesome and exceptional in all these areas, but if he's going to come in at 6 foot tall, we just don't have any guys that are 6 foot tall that play that position. Period.
Yeah.
It's why I gravitate to like the undersized, the shorter guards. When we're evaluating draft picks, because I'm like, if this guy is 6'2", he must be nasty.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. If he's 6'2", the other guys, most of these guys, the guards they're like 6'4", and then once in a while you see a guy 6'3", 6'2" come along, and I'm like, oh, I want that guy on my team. He must be, to make up for the lack of height, he must be just a motherfucker.
Yeah, he must be a dude.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, we got to get into some things, but it's cool that you have the athletic background. It was cool. Like when we were in Michigan, realizing that a bunch of people played high school sports, And it just makes sense. Like that's how, if you get into sports early, you're eventually going to gravitate to fantasy football and fantasy baseball. It just makes sense to me. Can you hear that? Can you hear that music?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Michael Jordan famously played baseball.
He wasn't very good at it, but he did.
He was good enough.
Yep.
He was a lot better than most people would have been. Hear that, Tyler? Welcome to the Mind of Mansion program. The latest, greatest, new face, new voice at Player Profiler. One of our best new analysts, the protege of Theo Greminger. Here with me today, it is Ian Miller. Talk to me.
Could not feel any better about being here now. I feel like I'm running out there onto the field basically, and we're just gonna get right into this.
Yeah, I think we just have to get right into it. I think we have to just get right into it. Let's start with some general strategy questions. Best ball season's heating up. Bestball Mania 5. Bestball Mania 5 is upon us. Underdog is a true friend of the underworld. We'll hear about Underdog a little bit more later in the show. Let's talk about your general approach this year to building best ball teams.
Yeah, I think one thing that kind of rings true every year is that people that build best ball teams build a lot of best ball teams. So when you're in the draft, one thing you don't want to focus on that's a little bit different than Dynasty or some of your redraft guys is there's essentially no point in reaching on players because you could hop in 10 minutes later to a different draft and you'll be in much better position to get the guy you wanted, and you'll get him closer to where his ADP is or at where his ADP is. So when I'm building my teams, the last thing I'm doing is going to a draft saying, okay, I'm going to want this guy, and this guy, when you should essentially let the board fall to you, see how your team's playing out. Because I think the most important thing you could tell yourself in best ball is that if I don't get this guy, I'll probably get him next draft, especially if he's someone I like that I target. I'm just not going to reach for him, because then you end up in this situation where you see a lot of, I would say, newer best ball players get into the situation where they do go into the approach like, oh, I really like this guy, got to have him. He's a must draft. And then you end up with like 70% exposure on one guy. And all that takes is one weird injury, a lower end of him hitting his range of outcomes. And all of a sudden, your 70% of best ball teams that drafted or reached for this one guy is essentially in shambles.
That's right. It makes sense if you're going to draft a handful of teams, right? So in order for this strategy to make sense, to basically approach best ball like a hedge fund manager, how many teams you need to draft? At least, 25?
I'd say at least, yeah.
Yeah, so you're trying to draft 25, maybe 50 teams because, the one thing that is challenging is to draft 150 teams. Even though Best Ball Mania is a huge field and, it's a weeks-long draft experience, 150 teams is real. Like, that's incredible dedication. That's why they have the cardio club where you're drafting while you're working out. You're finding ways to draft. And you're alienating loved ones by only half paying attention to what they're saying, right? I mean, I've had this situation where I ended up this happened to me this weekend, where my wife asked about this event. It was a one-woman show, and I said, yeah, sure, I'll go. And she said, oh, there's dinner, and I was okay, good, great. Sounds good. And then she sent me a calendar invite at another time, and I saw it come in, right? The one-woman show, and I said accept, right? But my mind was elsewhere. The whole time we're talking, the whole time I'm clicking accept, I'm not thinking. I'm just like, I'm doing something else with my brain is totally split, which is why multitasking is fake. Right, multitasking is one of the great lies in the history of humanity that you can you really can't. You really can't, because when you multitask, what ends up happening is you end up accepting an invitation to go to dinner and then a one-woman show, and you have all this other things that you would rather be doing, and then you realize it was like I had amnesia. I was like, wait, did I accept that invitation on my computer? Was it? She's like, I have the calendar invite right here. There's a check mark next to your name. You accepted, and then you told me when I asked you that you'd love to go. And I said, really? It was almost like it was a different person, and I was just like trying to understand what this other guy, what he was thinking, and what was going on, because I no memory, just complete blank slate, have no recollection of even having any of these conversations. And that's, I think what happens to people sometimes when they're like, I gotta get all 150 lineups in. That's just the price we pay, man.
Yeah,
Like, oh, it's too hard. It's too hard. No, it's not too hard. It's not too hard to get 150. You just got to put the work in. You've got to risk it all, baby. You got to risk it all, and maybe you might end up at a one-woman show on a Saturday night.
In these Underdog ads that they're playing, they need to play like the side effects like they do in the medication commercials, where you might end up at the one-woman show and not really realize what you're signing up for.
You weren't paying attention. So I just thought it was I realized what was, so Friday morning, I realized what was going on, and I play basketball. And usually I'm just kind of like, listening to the guys talk and whatever, and they're all, after, and then so I spoke up and I was like, so tonight I'm going to a one-woman show. It's just, I was like, yeah, I didn't even remember signing up for this or anything. And then all these guys, dude, they all had their story of, oh, I remember the time I had to go to this, and because I just was like, yeah, sure, yeah, nodding, yeah, okay. And then it's like, no, you committed to doing this. No, you said you're going. You can't get out of this right now. Or the worst is like, well, you don't have to go.
Oh, no.
Right? I guess you don't have to go. But we did RSVP, and so I would have to tell these people that you're not coming. What reason would you like me to give that you're not coming? That you're an idiot? That you're an obsessive, degenerate fantasy football player? And, okay, I'll go. So now, what about the way that you would build around a wide receiver, quarterback pairing, a stacking, multiple stacking, hero RB, zero RB. Last year, famously, we leaned into zero RB. No one else was. We were, because of Rachaad White, predominantly, some ETN, but also Rachaad White. I know that you were a fan of ETN last year as well. Great way to build your team, not have to invest early in running back. This year, my contention is that Breece Hall and, in particular, Bijan Robinson are so delicious in the first round. And it also, with Bestball, I'm pulling in some dynasty principles where we know that the age apex for running backs is 24.5. That means that there's this avalanche of production and fantasy points that happens early in their career in their first contract. In particular, year 2, year 3 of a running back contract, because you've seen all these stories about running backs. They get hurt in year 4. They're about to get their next contract, and it gets ruined. But year 2, year 3, man, and we're in year 2 for Bijan and year 3 for Breece Hall, and it's been a while since I was this fired up about 2 running backs in the first round. What do you think?
I'm right there with you. Both guys, actually. You can not only look at their peripherals and see that, oh, wow, these guys are probably going to smash next year, especially when you add in the context that both of their offenses were essentially abysmal or ran very poorly. And now we're going into a situation where both of them get quarterback upgrades, which is huge for the offense. And then in the terms of Bijan Robinson, he was someone who had to deal with Arthur Smith, who had some questionable, I think it's very safe to say questionable usage given out to essentially all his players, including Bijan, who is at Texas, is extremely efficient with near 60% carry percentage. And he's doing this with Roschon Johnson, even Jonathan Brooks there, despite him being younger. And then he goes to the NFL where the competition in Tyler Algier was the same, if not I mean, it was essentially the same. Roshan Johnson, Tyler Algier, when you look at day 3 type of rookies who can be productive when given a workload.
Yeah.
And yet Bijan Robinson only took a 41% carry percentage. Now, don't get me wrong, he was good with it, but that's not what was in his profile. That's not what should have happened. He probably should have been a smash spot rookie last year, but we're just going to reap the benefits of him. I mean, we're going to reap the benefits because he's not someone who's going to cost you the 101 in best ball, even though he has one of the highest likelihoods of reaching 101 amongst all players in the first round of best ball.
That's
so,
right. That's
and
right.
you don't have
So
to
if you
spend.
took him in the 101, you wouldn't because you don't have to, right? Because you're gonna play the portfolio game, and you'll have enough picks at the 103, 104, 105, 106, 107, 108 to get him. You don't need to take him at the 101. It would be a waste, right? Because you're going to play in enough. So, if you're only going to draft 5 teams, that's a different story, right? If you're going to draft 5 teams, you may only have the 101 once, right? In fact, probability-wise, you will never have it. You won't have it, right? So if you're at the 102, let's say, the argument would be to get the guy that's going to score the most fantasy points, period. In that particular setup, if you're not planning to draft a lot of teams, that would be the argument where we could construct a scenario where we would advise people to take Bijan at the 101.
Yes, we can.
Like in your home league, right? In your home league, it's not, especially half PPR home league. I mean, I think that's what I would even advise. I think I haven't got there yet in my head because it's just, we'll see, right? But if he's going mid-first round in such a wide receiver-centric format like Underdog, then you got to think that, in high stakes, with the FFPC as the summer plays out, I think we're going to start to see more and more Bijan high up in the top 5, where he goes 103 and 102, and you see a lot of drafts, and then it's just at some point just going to be like, I'm just going to take it with the 101. Like, that's just what we're doing. Same is true, I think, for Kyle Pitts, that the appreciation for Kyle Pitts is only going to go up as the summer goes along.
Yeah, I'm right there with you on Kyle Pitts, and he's one of those people whose ADP, especially like when you play in best ball, not everyone is going to be as in tune as you are, especially just hopping on, an Underdog draft on a Tuesday afternoon. Not everyone's going to be as in tune. And the thing with Kyle Pitts is he has that thing where he's disappointed managers back-to-back years, essentially. So the ADP is never really going to get out of hand with Kyle Pitts in the way that it hasn't with someone who hasn't disappointed you before. And the other thing with Kyle Pitts is part of the reason why we like him is his ADP won't get that high, yet his peripherals and his metrics show that he could be, or he's likely to be, quite good. And kind of like what we're talking about with Bijan, where he gets the quarterback upgrade, we've seen Kirk Cousins, essentially since he got to Minnesota, is basically leading the league or at a Patrick Mahomes level of pass attempts. And for an offense that has Bijan, Pitts, and London, that allows them all to eat. Even someone who, just going back to that Bijan thing, people see Christian McCaffrey and all the work that he does out of the backfield as a receiver. The only rookies with a higher target share than Bijan last year are McCaffrey, Barkley, Bush, and Kamara as rookies. And he's likely going to a spot where the pass attempts are only going to go up compared to a Christian McCaffrey, where the 49ers are likely going to stay around 30 pass attempts and try to be as efficient as possible. Where we've seen the Kirk Cousins formula, they're going to throw the ball a lot, and Zach Robinson seems to be fine with it based on his prior history as an offensive coordinator. So we're in a spot where, honestly, a Falcons stack could be a smash spot.
Bindles in the chat has just gifted a player profiler a membership. And so what we're going to do is the first person to email me, podfather@rotounderworld.com, anything. Like, email me, you know what we'll do? Email me a memory of Nate Liss. Anyone that wants to email podfather@rotounderworld.com, a memory of Nate Liss, and then just get the name and email address of whoever you want to gift a membership to. Most people that are listening, you already have a membership to playerprofiler.com. You have the rankings, you have the draft kit, you have everything. You want to share? Go ahead. We'll set up a free membership to anyone you want to gift it to. You just have to share a memory, a good memory of Nate Liss, on the Sonic Truth program, and then I will email Nate. And then what we'll be doing is we'll be back-to-back, both emailing Nate, and then earlier in the podcast, you'll hear it in the outtakes. I'll talk about the text message I sent him. So then we're really going to be bothering him. We're really going to be going all in. We're really going to be stalking Nate Liss with email. Different electronic mediums will be stalking Nate Liss. But yes, we'll give out an all-in. That's $135 plus tax value, and it's incredible value. What you get, all 5 advanced modules at Player Profiler. Give it to anybody for the year for free, and that's just me being inspired by Bindles. Bindles doing great work. So, any long-term dynasty concerns about like a London or a Pitts because of the Michael Penix draft pick?
Not too worried about it. I mean, I feel like we should feel essentially the same, especially in Dynasty. A lot of people get confused that I want to look 3 years out. Well, don't do that because value is essentially just built off of the prior year. That's why sometimes you can compare these underdog rankings and Dynasty ADP and just find values. Because what you're going to see a lot in Dynasty is even take someone like a James Robinson a couple years ago. Awesome out of nowhere. The long term did not look bright for James Robinson in terms of the team he was on, the regime that he was a part of, where his draft capital was. And yet his Dynasty ADP exploded the year after he was awesome. Now, obviously, that's kind of an extreme example, but just take a look at Dynasty ADP right now. And for the most part, you're going to see guys who did well last year start to shoot up rankings. Even if you're a guy that said, I think this guy's going to be better in a couple, 2-3 years than this guy, I guarantee you that it's going to be the previous year that matters a lot more when you're looking at Dynasty values and ADP.
So what you're saying is this. You're saying just draft Pitts in Dynasty, get your hands on him in Dynasty, go trade for him in Dynasty. If he does well and you're concerned that, Cousins has been moved and they're committed now to Penix, you can trade him. And the community, you're going to find at least 1 or 2 league mates that are not going to be as concerned as you are, and that are just going to be based on last year's production. They're gonna just look back at last year's production, and that will be how they assign value to Kyle Pitts. And also, a lot of other dynasty services are going to be slow to adjust, slower than us with our dynasty rankings, slow to adjust. They'll post up Kyle Pitts in spite of the concerns, the volume concerns that may be the surface post Cousins. So just be fearless, knowing that dynasty leaguers are going to chase last year's production. They're going to extrapolate it no matter what happens. So just draft Kyle Pitts. I think that's great advice. That's great advice. Any concerns with Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison?
I think
with J.J. McCarthy, rookie quarterback.
There has to be concerns, quite honestly, because you're going from Kirk Cousins, who we just used to prop up the weapons that Atlanta has, to J.J. McCarthy. And J.J. McCarthy could be good.
By the way, this is why I've been asking multiple people on podcasts about this, by the way, because this is the cold fusion effect in fantasy football is something that infuriates me, where all the hype and talk is going to be about Drake London and Kyle Pitts, and there is, right? Especially with Drake London. You would agree that he's one of the most hyped players this whole offseason. And crickets on the other side of it. It's all about Kirk Cousins, the Kirk Cousins effect. I'm like, what about the reverse Kirk Cousins effect in Minnesota? No one wants to talk about that?
Yeah, no. And the other thing is J.J. McCarthy could be good. And we're also, what happens in the offseason a lot, especially when people get really excited about his rookie quarterback, is they basically expect the rookie quarterback to produce like a Kirk Cousins, let's say, for an example. Like J.J. McCarthy could be anything. He could even be Kirk Cousins. But typically we don't get C.J. Strouds. We don't get rookie Justin Herberts. That's not something that usually happens. Even Trevor Lawrence, who's probably like he's a second round dynasty selection. He's someone who, what did we see his rookie year? Even his second year, it wasn't fantastic, especially for those weapons. So we have this effect now where Minnesota, again, Justin Jefferson is fine in the sense that he's still probably going to be an 18-point per game producer. Fine. But at the same time, the upside likely isn't as high. He's just so good that it's like Kirk Cousins in his career. He has 20 points per game with Kirk Cousins in 54 games. The 6 games that he doesn't have Kirk Cousins, 17.7. So yes, he's still going to be fine, but that's not the upside that you got with Kirk Cousins. The one who you should actually be a bit more worried about is Jordan Addison. And I like Jordan Addison. He has solid peripherals, but the value is pretty high. And the fact that there is still a bit of risk considering Jordan Addison was someone who feasted off touchdowns last year and passing volume. He had a 9.3% touchdown rate, which is very high. And they were throwing nearly 40 times per game in Minnesota. That's his peripherals alone on an average offense doesn't indicate that he should have put up the points per game that he did last year. And if you want to see splits that should worry you, and again, it's an even split. 8 games with Kirk Cousins, 9 games without. In his 8 games with Kirk Cousins, 15.8 points per game. That's solid. His 9 games that he wasn't, 10.5 points per game. So while I like the Addison profile, you now get your situation is likely decreased and very likely decreased. And to make up for that, just to get him to basically where he was last year, you're going to need a pretty solid boost in his peripherals, which is likely for a guy going into a second year. But at the same time, that's the bet you're making, is that he can basically return to last year or get slightly better. And for the value that he's going at, it's not exactly meaningful production.
It's not good, dude. It's just not good. So let's think about it from a portfolio perspective, right? So Jordan Addison's ADP on Underdog right now, it's dropped a little bit. It's dropped a few spots, right? It went from like 68 to 72. But I mean, it's not a huge drop, right? But I mean, it was as high. I guess it was as high as the late 50s. Okay, so it could adjust 3 or 4 or 5 rounds. If you're an auxiliary receiver, a non-number 1, and you're getting a rookie quarterback, that is a major step down from a pocket passer who's been historically prolific. That's the perfect recipe for, wide receiver 2 maxing out their volume and their production. Where now with J.J. McCarthy, the thing is that the great lie is that because J.J. McCarthy looks like Kirk Cousins, like in terms of build and in terms of play style, that it's closer to a 1-for-1. It's not. It's not remotely close. So when you're looking at your portfolio, anytime you draft a player in a 12-team league, right, there is a 1 in 12 chance, 8.3% chance in any given round that you draft a player, right? So when you go through the average exposure to players that are being drafted in all drafts, I mean, once you get out to the fringes, you start to see players where the exposure is even lower on average, just because they're not getting drafted. But assuming a player is getting drafted in all drafts, the average exposure is going to be 8.3. So for me, if I want to be low on a player, but he can beat me because he is very good, then I want to have maybe half the field, right? I want to be exposure on half the field. If a guy is more of a fringier option, a guy that I'm very confident can't beat me, but could put me underwater if I am overexposed to him, where the opportunity cost is a guy that could go off, a sleeper that could really go nuclear, that to me is much more dangerous to be overexposed to that guy. So I would go into this year's Underdog Bestball Mania thinking, all right, I'll target about a 4% rostership percentage for Justin Jefferson, which is half of what the average would be, because I don't believe he's a good value. I think that you're getting a negative ROI on his ADP. With Jordan Addison, I would probably be closer to 2%.
Yeah, and the other thing is Jordan Addison paying off. If you're talking about realistic production, you're talking about hopefully wide receiver 2 level production. And when you look at things like WARP, like wins over replacement production, wide receiver 2 compared to QB2, RB2, tight end 2, well, tight ends are pretty much a wasteland. You don't have to compare that because the value is nowhere close. But the wide receiver 2 doesn't pay off as much because when you look at QB2s, the value from QB2 to QB3 is it's a pretty sharp decline. From RB2 to RB3 is a pretty sharp decline. From wide receiver 2 to wide receiver 3, even to wide receiver 4, you're talking about more linear declines compared to running backs and quarterbacks because there are so many of them, which usually means you get it's all about spike weeks. So then it's essentially, I mean, it's just much less of a payoff for Jordan Addison if he even hits the ceiling compared to someone in his range that you could get in the 60s that is more likely for running back 2 production, or even if the part of the reason why we use wins over replacement production is because let's say 14 points per game from a wide receiver actually doesn't mean as much as 13.5 points per game as a running back because of the sharp decline and replacement production behind it.
That's right. So let's say you want an undersized wide receiver 2 with a rookie quarterback, okay, who runs like a 4.45. Okay. May I introduce you to Demario Pop Douglas with an ADP of 185 as opposed to Jordan Addison, who's going more than 100 picks earlier? This is what we're talking about. This is what you have to do. Like, find comparison points and decide, wait, is this really the direction? Isn't there an arbitrage play here? And you might say, well, what about Javon Baker? Okay. The odds that 2 rookies, not first-round picks, are outproducing Demario Douglas and running more routes and commanding more targets is a very low probability, right? So I think Demario Douglas would be a fair comp for Jordan Addison. And that's where, if you see that kind of arbitrage opportunity, the guy that's going at pick 70 and 80 versus the guy that's going at pick 180, it's just so clear and obvious to me. Like, I like Demario Douglas. Like, the reason why he's actually getting a quarterback upgrade, you could argue, as opposed to Jordan Addison. And then he has, 2, top 100 wide receivers that the Patriots drafted. Now all of a sudden, oh wow, okay, this guy's buried. This guy's over. Like, you can see his ADP has fallen more on Underdog recently than even Jordan Addison's, and that doesn't make any goddamn sense to me.
And actually, to shout out the article that'll be dropping on Player Profiler here soon that I just submitted. Demario Douglas is one of the guys that I'm targeting in Dynasty, and the same is true for Bestball because of how cheap he is. I like the comparison you use. Both have rookie quarterbacks.
Oh, I'm sorry, Javon Baker was pick 110. Excuse me.
And the competition around Demario Douglas is also much less than it was or is for Jordan Addison. And we saw what Demario Douglas could do as a rookie on a per-game basis, 23.9% target rate, 1.7 yards per out run. If we just look at day 3 rookies to do that, we're talking about Amon-Ra St. Brown, Puka, Marquez Colston, Mike Williams, and Denarius Moore. Sure, the risk with Pop Douglas is that he's nothing. Those per route peripherals were just a mirage. And guess what? You lost at pick 180. That's not something that's going to sink your team as much as Jordan Addison being a disappointment, and you spent a top 60, top 65 pick to acquire it.
Yeah, I mean, he thankfully, like I said, the ADP has corrected, but it's not going to correct enough. We know it. Even throughout the summer, it's going to be inflated and not a good value. What about team stacks? What's your favorite stack given ADP right now? Quarterback and a couple wide receivers.
I think there's quite a few this year that are pretty intriguing, but just based on ADP, you can build a pretty nice Miami Dolphins stack. Tyreek in the first round is fine. I mean, that's totally cool. You're talking about someone who absolutely exploded last year and basically put up high-end quarterback production as a wide receiver. Then you have Devon Achane, who's going round 2, round 3 turn. And this is someone who legitimately has top 3 running back upside because we saw how good he was on an efficiency basis with the Dolphins. And yes, while he probably won't be as efficient in terms of adding carry percentage or adding volume, we see from his profile at Texas A&M that he was the most efficient back on the team, even when he was taking over 60% carry percentage. So Devon Achane has that well in his range of outcomes, and he's in the perfect offense to do it. And then you have guys that you can add in terms of Jaylen Waddle, who's going basically round 3-ish. So you could stack that with it. And then Tua you can get quite a bit later. And it's not like I like Tua on his own, but when you're stacking this pretty awesome offense together, Tua is going to obviously have spike weeks and obviously have pretty high correlation to these guys. And then it even allows you later in your drafts to pair a Raheem Mostert, or even if you wanted to pair a Jaylen Wright for very cheap.
Yeah, Jaylen Wright. If the stack I would target is Hill in the first, Waddle in the third, Tua wherever the fuck he goes, and then Jaylen Wright. That's the way to go. That's a great. Well, give us one more. Give us another stack you like.
I mean, we could even go back to the Falcons, although I will say Drake London's ADP has been creeping up to a place where we're basically expecting the upside to happen.
Yeah.
Now that we're seeing him kind of fringe round 1, because I was liking that when he was more round 2, and you could pair with a Bijan in the middle of the first round, and then you could have Kirk Cousins in a similar Tua range. That one, and Kyle Pitts, obviously, is someone who can be a tight end 1 upside level player, and you could stack it in this passing offense that should be pretty solid. But when you go between the two, I am someone who, if I could choose just one stack, it's going to be the Dolphins.
Let's look at the Falcons for a moment. It's intriguing when you look at their I kind of like the Falcon stack without London. Okay, am I crazy to stack Cousins, Bijan, Mooney, and Pitts? That feels pretty good to me. Because Darnell Mooney is a best ball prototype receiver.
He was also someone that won in the draft in the sense that we weren't sure if the Falcons were going to go wide receiver. Now you have Darnell Mooney, who's likely to have more spike weeks because they didn't draft a rookie. He'll be on the field more, and you could stack him with the Kirk Cousins, Pitts, and Bijan.
He's going to pick 153 on Underdog. Give us another late round best ball wide receiver.
I mean, one of the better ones has to be Dontavian Wicks. You're talking about someone who has the possibility of being the wide receiver 1 on the Packers. It's honestly more realistic than people want to envision because his per route peripherals were awesome all season. And then you pair that with, at the end of the season, he was doing quite well. And everyone expects Jordan Love to do well, but no one has any conviction in the wide receivers. And the cheapest one in terms of Dontavian Wicks, or the cheapest one that has realistic wide receiver 1 upside on that team, I really like, especially if you are someone that took Jordan Love, stack Dontavian Wicks with him later.
That's not one I had considered. I'm team Jaden Reed. So I think Jaden Reed and or Christian Watson will be the wide receiver 1, but there will be injuries. There will be disappointments, and Romeo Doubs is not good. So I think that it's more the wide receiver 2 position is wide open there, and Wicks could easily be that guy. I don't see why not. So I think it's a great call. It's a great call. What about the wide receiver that you believe other than Jordan Addison? Okay, we've pretty much decided Jordan Addison you want to have absolute minimal exposure to. Give us another guy you're staying away from at wide receiver.
There's honestly a decent amount of them because wide receiver is a position that gets a little sketchy for me, especially when you have to use high-end draft capital on him. And the guy that I'm going to say, a lot of people might not like that I'm going to say it, but it's Marcin Harrison Jr., who's going closer to the first round than he is the third round in Underdog drafts. And when we talk about someone like Puka, let's say, Puka is going 4-5 picks ahead of Marcin Harrison Jr. Puka just had the third most points per game by a rookie of all time. Marcin Harrison Jr., you're basically saying, oh, please hit a top 5 rookie season of all time. And as good as Marcin Harrison Jr. is, for him to hit a top 5 season as a rookie, you're essentially counting on Kyler Murray making a comeback in terms of being a good passer that he hasn't been in the last couple of years. And just the fact that rookie wide receivers aren't historically great, even if they just look at some of the best wide receiver prospects of all time. Julio Jones wouldn't have paid off the ADP in terms of his rookie season that Marcin Harrison Jr. did. Calvin Johnson wouldn't have paid off the ADP. AJ Green wouldn't have paid off the ADP. The problem is we get so sucked into these are his comparisons, and even those wide receivers aren't guys that truly hit until year 2, year 3, even guys like DeAndre Hopkins, like the best wide receivers you can think of probably weren't going to be that or weren't as good as a rookie as you would have thought they were.
Yeah, That's what about rookie wide receivers whose ADP you're a big fan of that you're drafting? Because it's all about value, and the value of Marvin Harrison in seasonal leagues, like I said, it's complete hopium, and sort of a cognitive dissonance around how rookie wide receivers typically perform. But there's a couple rookie wide receivers that I think are interesting.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm alone on this one, but one guy that I like is Xavier Worthy, both in rookie drafts and taking as a cheap flyer, because one, you're attached to a Patrick Mahomes offense. And the surprising part is that I would have guessed actually that his ADP would have risen a bit more since he landed with the Chiefs and people get intrigued by landing spot. But this is someone who has the profile, in my opinion, to go along with that landing spot. Because when we talk about him being productive his entire collegiate career, he posted a 25% target share every single season at Texas, despite playing alongside Bijan Robinson, who's one of the best receiving backs in the country at the time, despite playing alongside Adonai Mitchell, who is essentially a top 50 pick this past year, and people say he was falling, playing along Jatavian Sanders, who was a top 110 pick in the NFL. And you put all that together, and this is someone who put up a 25% target share in every season, and the only other first-round rookie to do that was Calvin Ridley. So there are solid comps when you look at his production profile, and he lands in a Patrick Mahomes offense, like with what we talked about in terms of Jordan Addison. Jordan Addison's peripherals weren't awesome, but he played in this offense where he had a 9.3% touchdown rate. He played in a high volume passing offense, which is what Xavier Worthy is going to be. And he's not even as expensive as I would have expected for a round one Chiefs wide receiver.
Yeah, so he's still going in the 6th round. Right, he was going at around 94-ish before the draft. Now he's going at pick 62 on Underdog, so he's up 30 picks. But I mean, it's still a value to me. I want him. I think that's great. It's tough. You see a guy rise 30, 40 picks. It's like, oh god, this feels so outrageous. This is expensive, right? It's just where it's like inflation. You're just like, oh man, this is not worth it anymore because it used to be so cheap. It's just tough to figure. Oh, wow, man, eggs, right? Like, man, eggs used to be so inexpensive on a per egg basis, right? Now, I don't know. Then you got to remember, eggs are so nutritious. Eggs are so good for you. Eggs are so delicious. It's fucking worth it. Go buy your eggs, man. So that's Xavier Worthy, absolutely. How do you feel about the running back dead zone this year?
I would say that guys in the beginning of that dead zone in terms of Travis Etienne, Josh Jacobs, those are guys that I'm intrigued by, even Rachaad White to an extent. But the thing with Rachaad White is you have to realize that he doesn't have the upside that the other two have in terms of finishing top 5, at least from what we've seen profile. He's not someone who's really taken on this high-end carry percentage along with efficiency, whether that was at Arizona State or with the Bucs. But based on what he's done as a receiver, he's still a fine pick. But the guys that I really like, and especially the top one, is Josh Jacobs. I'm surprised that he is going at the beginning of round 3 right now and what we'd call the dead zone, when he's someone who has a 70% carry percentage in both of the last 2 seasons. In each of the last 3 seasons has a target share above 10%. And he goes from an offense that was in the bottom 25. So they're 25 or lower in terms of points and yards in rushing and total offensive points, or total yards and total offensive points, to an offense that ranked top 12 in both of those categories. It's the same profile. He's not outrageously old by any means. It may surprise people that he's essentially the same age as Najee Harris. And he's now to a much better offense where we know that he has bell cow usage, and that's what he's been, and he's been doing it with fine efficiency, despite being on an offense that wasn't exactly that great to a better offense.
So I pushed back on Rachaad White. Rachaad White was number 2 in carries last year, so he gave you what you want. He gave you top 10 in targets, top 10 in carries, just didn't give you the efficiency, but the run blocking rating was 33.7 on Player Profiler. That's number 29 in the league. All he needs is better run blocking, and he gets over 4 yards a carry, and he's going to give you exactly what you talked about, top 5 season. So to me, it's a straight line for Rachaad White to be top 5 running back. I mean, last year, he was the RB4 in fantasy, so he's already done it, even without the rushing efficiency. If there is an improvement in rushing efficiency, then we're talking 18 fantasy points a game. Very well in his range of outcomes. I think he's an incredible value in drafts. Now, so the dead zone is alive again, but I'm not as busy drafting running backs in the dead zone this year because of Breece Hall and Bijan Robinson in round 1. Do you feel like there's been an overreaction to the Blake Corum pick in LA where Kyren Williams has become a dead zone value?
I actually think Kyren Williams is now becoming a value. Someone who I
Yes.
wasn't intrigued with based on his earlier ADP, but now that Corum comes and he's now falling in ADP, he's someone that I'm actually intrigued by. And not just because he was very good last year, essentially led the league in efficiency, and while taking a pretty high in carry percentage for what should be a solid McVay offense as it usually is. But the other thing that you should know about the Rams and Sean McVay is that he loves to use bell cows. We saw it even last year when Kyren Williams goes down and he had been the bell cow the entire season. He turns to Henderson. Henderson in 2 games with Kyren Williams out, a 58% carry percentage, 50% carry percentage. He even turns to Royce Freeman, 81% carry percentage, 86.7% carry percentage. McVay is someone who loves to use a bell cow. What I don't envision happening is a split, essentially where you're talking about one guy takes about half the work, the other guy takes half the work. I don't envision that in a McVay offense because we haven't seen it in a McVay offense. Even when Cam Akers in that rookie year was starting off slow, it was Henderson who was taking bell cow level usage, and then it flipped in the season, and Cam Akers is taking the bell cow level usage. What we really haven't seen from McVay is splits. He's not someone who uses running backs in splits, and that should get you excited for Kyren Williams. And in terms of rookie drafts, actually makes Blake Corum a bit of a value at the late second because, again,
Yes.
in the running back position, it just takes one injury. And
Yeah.
we have someone in McVay who's shown that he loves to use bell cows, and we've seen Corum in the past put up bell cow level usage, despite playing along Donovan Edwards, who could end up as a day 2 pick next year.
All right, so here's the thing. Kyren Williams can beat you, right? We saw him last year. If Blake Corum picks up an injury, then it's back to Kyren Williams as a total bell cow again. He's putting up top 5 production again. They drafted Steve Avila, which totally reinvented their run blocking and helped Kyren Williams' efficiency. You can't just not draft him in best ball, right? You can do what we did with Justin Jefferson and just say, hey, I'm going to make sure I got 4% Kyren Williams, even though I personally don't believe his ADP has fallen enough, right? He needs to fall for me to feel comfortable going, be overexposed, let's say 10+% rostership. He's going to have to be in the 4th round for me to do that. And that's just not going to happen, right? But what I can do is get, let's say, 4% Kyren Williams in best ball, and then double, triple, quadruple that, 15% Blake Corum. So to me, that's the move because one of them is likely to be getting, a 60+% opportunity share any given week. And because we don't believe there's going to be a 50-50 split, it improves and increases the probability that either of those two guys gives you spike weeks for best ball, which means that in the aggregate, you want to be even higher than, let's say, if you just add 8.3, which is the average exposure, plus 8.3, that's 16.6. Go higher. Between the two of them, 20% rostership, and you'll be in great shape. Now, which incumbent player got kneecapped just as much as Kyren Williams did, but it's not being reported? There's barely a budge to his ADP.
Based on ADP, haven't looked too in-depth on this guy. Now, obviously, we talked about the Vikings weapons. I think Vikings weapons are one of the lower end pieces. Now, not necessarily totally from the draft, but the fact that they'll start a rookie quarterback and most of their ADPs haven't moved as much as we probably think that they should.
Right.
Michael Mayer's, obviously, his is deflated and his has been talked about a lot. But I think one that kind of goes under the radar, who's already a tough one to swallow based on the passing offense, and it's not that it's a high value, is Josh Downs. Because Josh Downs was someone who put up solid peripherals. People like Josh Downs. And the problem that I originally had with Josh Downs is that he's on an offense with Anthony Richardson, who you can like, but as a passer, hasn't shown that he can support, let alone two wide receivers to a substantial amount of points, especially when he hasn't shown good peripherals at Florida as in terms of being a passer. And last year in his limited sample where he was rushing the hell out of the ball, he wasn't someone who showed up as a good passer in peripherals. And there's already Michael Pittman Jr., who's going to take a hog of the targets. And now they add in Adonai Mitchell. And while you could still expect Josh Downs to be higher on the depth chart, that's another piece that they're likely going to want to get involved using a top 55 pick on him. And someone that people like, especially film guys really like Adonai Mitchell. So he's someone who now goes from the clear number 2 option on a passing offense that we shouldn't be too thrilled about to much closer to the wide receiver 3 on the team than he was the wide receiver 1. So he's someone I think doesn't get talked about in terms of that the draft had a pretty negative effect on him.
Yeah, I mean, he's down. Let's see. If we go to, we could probably share my screen here. There is an ADP tab on Player Profiler. And so you can see here, there's Josh Downs. And if we go down, he's fallen close to 3 rounds. And that seems about right to me. I think it could go lower, but he is one of those players where because he doesn't have explosive athleticism and he's on a low volume offense, he can't beat you. Like fading him into oblivion can't hurt you. There's no one that's like, Josh Downs was the reason I won. That's not going to happen. And so when you're going down the list of guys you could draft, you got to ask yourself, okay, what's the risk versus reward here? The reward on Josh Downs, I can guarantee you there are guys in that ADP range of 120 to 140 that are going to help you and deliver more upside than Josh Downs any given draft pick.
Yeah, and the other thing with Josh Downs is that while his ADP has dropped 3 rounds in best ball, we're talking about late rounds. So those 3 rounds, obviously, when we talk about a guy dropping a round in the early rounds, this isn't as substantial as that because you're at the point where you're looking for these level of dart throws that are going to win you weeks. So guys that we talked about in Pop Douglas, guys that we talked about in Dontavian Wicks, those are going to be the kind of guys who you're wanting to take dart throws on. And I'm not as intrigued to take a dart throw on Josh Downs as I was prior to the draft.
Exactly. Yeah. And the fact that his ADP was 100 before the draft was insane anyway, because of the Anthony Richardson problem that he has.
Yes.
So we talked about our general approach to best ball drafts, treating it like a portfolio, drafting in best ball like a hedge fund manager. What about startups? How do you generally approach dynasty startups, both single and super flex, single quarterback and super flex?
So in terms of general strategy, there's a couple things that I like to do. And this wasn't true a couple years ago. Everyone a couple years ago talked about trading down, trade down, collect the assets, trade down in Dynasty, collect the assets.
Yeah.
The problem is that everybody is doing that. And there is some truth to the zig to the zag.
No, because I'll take the blame, dude. I'll take the blame. You can take it. It's my fault. I did this.
Now I'm in a position where I actually like trading up in Dynasty because one, with everyone trading down, the assets that you used to be able to get for trading down are no longer the same type of deals. So essentially one thing that I've done in startups, especially this past year, I'm trading up for the Josh Allens of the world, and it's not costing me as much as I really thought it would. Trading up my first round pick, say 109, even adding my second and getting a third or fourth back to get essentially the best asset in Dynasty is something that I've now liked to do. Trading up is more common for me than trading down. The other thing in terms of trading with startups is I like to sandwich picks. So if I have this second round pick and people talk about, oh, the third, fourth round are kind of like where you get these last of the studs. So what I like to do is everyone could think, oh, I want to trade this second round pick and get a fourth, maybe an eighth. What I really like to do is take that second round pick, trade and get a third and a fourth, and then add your sixth or something like that. Sandwich them in the middle. You're getting multiple picks in the middle of where you'd like to get these elite players. And you're getting it because you're trading one up and you're trading one down that you don't think that the teardrop is as substantial as the value is making it seem. And now you're getting 2 picks in that price range, one for trading down to a similar tier and one for trading up into the next tier.
Pretty smart. Yeah, historically, you look back at ADPs in Dynasty, and it's like, hey, a lot of 6th rounds. have a lot of landmines, right? Whereas round 3, pretty stable. You know what you're getting, right? So it's interesting. Once you get into the 6th, 7th, 8th round, you got to be savvy. And if you want to trade out of those rounds, by all means, go for it. I mean, get some rookie picks for those picks, right? I'm fine with that. What is your favorite late round pick in startups? Maybe give us a couple.
Yeah, I've got a few. Some progressive getting it later. I got Keenan Allen as one who's, yes, he's getting older. But again, we're talking about someone who had a career season last year in terms of target share and efficiency and points per game, coming off a career season to a Bears offense where you can like Roma Dunze, but again, he's a rookie. And Caleb Williams, who, yeah, he's not Justin Herbert, but of any rookie quarterbacks who we've had belief in to be able to carry an offense or support wide receiver weapons, Caleb Williams has to be up there in recent history. And then if you don't like Keenan Allen, there's other guys like DeAndre Hopkins, for example, who's going even later than him, who, yes,
I can't believe you just said Hopkins. I can't fucking believe it. I was like, if you are going to say with a straight face Keenan Allen, then the logical next guy for all the same reasons, similar age, efficiency is not declining at all, just consistent production. You could argue, by some metrics, you could argue had a career year, in their 30s. Thank you for I can't continue.
Those would be 2 wide receivers that I'm looking to get late. And especially with you're taking the veteran discount and then you're adding some on top of it is what it seems to be, because we've seen the veteran discount for the guys earlier, and it's not nearly as substantial as it's been for these 2 guys who you could argue are coming off essentially career seasons or bounce back seasons from what you were worried about. Then we mentioned this guy in Bestball and Raheem Mostert. Now, I'm not sure that there's ever been a guy that's finished as high in terms of points per game or as he did last season that is going as cheap as he is. Now, again, I think A-Chain's going to take a bulk of the carries, but the full expectation based on his ADP is that Raheem Mostert, for the record, is closer to Jaylen Wright in ADP than he is to A-Chan, despite leading that team in carry percentage, touchdowns.
Oh, he's a running back in his 30s.
Of course, but that discount is already accounted for. What it's not accounting for enough is the upside that you have somebody who can, again, produce on an offense where you actually don't even need a high-end amount of carries because of how efficient this running back offense has been. So Raheem Mostert is someone you could take a very, very cheap flyer on and get high-end production. And it doesn't even have to happen. You're not burning a pick here.
Yeah, I mean, there's a book that was written. I'm looking for this book. I have a library here of books, and I found this book, The Dynasty Dominator. It's available on Amazon, and it talks about this crazy concept called win now and win later. That it's a false choice, and what you can do is if you're going to trade back, you can trade down, you can pick up an extra rookie pick, you can do all these things, and not necessarily have to sacrifice being competitive in year one. Because guys like Keenan Allen, DeAndre Hopkins, Raheem Mostert, you can surprise everybody. They're like, oh, this guy's going full rebuild. Look at him trading back. And then they're like, wait a second, what is he doing? Why is he drafting Keenan Allen? Wait, he's drafting DeAndre Hopkins. He has back-to-back picks because of those other trades he did. Wait a second. Wait, his roster's pretty good. And he's got 2 firsts next year. How the fuck did he do this? That's how you did it, man. That's how you did it. All right. So when we come back, 10 burning questions. 10 burning questions with Ian Miller after this. This episode is made possible by Underdog Fantasy, and Underdog Fantasy is the leader in best ball. When you go to join an Underdog Fantasy best ball draft, it fills very quickly, especially now. It's Best Ball Mania season, baby. Best Ball Mania 5. I can't believe they're at Best Ball Mania 5 already. $15 million in prizes. They're giving out $15 million with $1.5 million to first. Playing in best ball leagues makes you better. It helps train you on player value and strategy. And Underdog offers a lot more than just best ball contests. They offer pick'ems. My new favorite, the golf pick'ems. But they have the NBA pick'ems, baseball pick'ems going on throughout the offseason. Hit the pick'ems, back to best ball, hit the pick'ems. So use promo code Underworld. Promo code Underworld gets you a 50% deposit bonus up to $250. So they've increased the maximum deposit bonus. It was $100. Now it's up to $125. When you get the Underdog app, use promo code Underworld and go draft your ass off. 10 burning questions. 10 burning questions with Ian Miller. Off we go, my friend. What was your favorite pick of the NFL draft?
So I'll say two answers here because one was strictly non-fantasy related in terms of when I watch the draft, everyone likes to know what they expect is coming and all these things. So when a little bit of chaos happens, I'm here for it because it sends the world into a frenzy, the draft world into a frenzy. So Michael Penix going 8 to the Falcons, as horrible as a pick it was for the Falcons, in my opinion, was one of my favorites because it just ensued chaos. It basically shut out the rest of the draft because everyone wanted to talk about the Penix pick. And they still are talking about the Penix pick. Because
you think it was that bad of a pick? Because the quarterback is the most valuable position.
I don't think it was as bad of a pick as people want to say it was. But again, it was a bit mind-boggling because
you want to go criticize the Kirk Cousins signing, go ahead.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Really, what the criticism is you shouldn't have signed Kirk Cousins if this was your plan all along. And that's true. But in a vacuum, taking Penix there, hard to argue with, considering the value you can get on a playmaking quarterback, not just a, not a Bo Nix. So they had gone Bo Nix there. That would have been really bad. That would have been catastrophic, but at least they saved it with the upside that you get by grabbing a big Penix there.
And I kind of saved your earlier question about it for this because I knew this was coming up when we talk about Pitts and London long term because Penix will be there. Well, okay, if Kirk Cousins is really good like we expect him to be or help the assets in year one and they win, guess what? Nothing's going to change. Kirk Cousins will go into the next year and you'll have the same assets. Now, if you're worried that or if something happens and Kirk Cousins is hurt or he's not as good as you expected him to be, then you get a second chance with a quarterback who was drafted in the top 10, who's shown solid passing abilities and has high upside to distribute the ball at the next level. So actually, I would say that it's just fine for guys like Kyle Pitts, Drake London, Bijan Robinson. If anything, it's a safety valve and doesn't deter you from what you already liked about this passing offense right away.
Yeah, kind of like what you're saying, man. I'm picking up what you're laying down. We have a question from Twitter, and again, I want to encourage everyone on Twitter or X to, go ahead and post your questions up right on that, right on the string there, right on Twitter. Go ahead and reply to the post from Acropolis Army. Says, I'm not a Gabe Davis guy, but isn't he a sneaky value? We talk about these late-round quarterbacks, late-round wide receivers, late-round running backs in best ball. I mean, why not Gabe Davis?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not against it for how late he is. He still goes to an offense that's fine, and we expect Trevor Lawrence to be just fine next year.
Yeah, and we've been hammering this idea that a guy like Brian Thomas, you can't have huge expectations in year one.
No, he's already someone who's, I put him in like a Rashad Bateman, Quentin Johnston type bucket where that's the downside risk. Now, again, there's upside with guys like this, with Brian Thomas, but the downside risk is essentially nothing. And especially as a rookie, Gabe Davis is more likely than not to be the wide receiver 2 on a Trevor Lawrence team than the new first-round rookie is, even if you like him, because he's not someone, especially in year one, knowing what we know about rookie quarterbacks, knowing his profile, or rookie wide receivers, knowing what we know about his profile, you could still like Brian Thomas and expect him to be the wide receiver 3 on this team in 2024.
Jordan Addison's ADP will never fall to the Gabe Davis level. But Gabe Davis actually has, I think, a higher probability of delivering spike weeks than Jordan Addison. That's fact.
I think that's definitely fair, especially given the offensive situation that they're both under.
Yeah, that's not. I'm not even going probability. I'm saying that's a fact. That's a fact. You're like, oh, but that's just probabilities. Yeah, but it's a fact that his probability is higher. That is true. That is a true thing. And you let us know in the comments if you disagree. But I'm telling you, it's futile to disagree because it's a fact. Now, what is your strategy and your approach in Dynasty rookie drafts?
In Dynasty rookie drafts, I think there's still a lot of opportunity to trade down that you didn't see as much in Dynasty startups. And I don't like making picks at the beginning of tiers when I think that you can essentially acquire assets. I mean, just in one draft that I recently had, I took the 102, traded back to the 105, and I got in return guys like Stephon Diggs, David Montgomery, while giving a piece there. And I went from Marcin Harrison Jr. to a Malik Neighbors. And then I got a solid deal to trade down to a 107 and get Brock Bowers. And while you may be saying, well, obviously Marcin Harrison Jr. is a better prospect, better value installation than Brock Bowers, I don't think the profiles, especially looking into the future where you shouldn't be drafting these rookies expecting year one production or peak production right away. So if I'm looking at this as in, oh, well, Brock Bowers isn't in this solid situation. He's one of the best tight end prospects that we've ever had come into the draft. And I just got a ton of assets moving from 102 to 107 in 2 moves where I don't think either guys are going to pop in year one or provide. Marcin Harrison Jr. obviously come closer to providing meaningful production. But for the guys that I got, the most likely scenario is that of all the guys that I just mentioned, the pieces that I got from trading down in terms of Stephon Diggs, David Montgomery, are more likely meaningful producers in 2024 than those rookie picks that we were discussing as the main deal in this. And I still get an elite level rookie pick in Brock Bowers.
You are truly a Josh Larkey and Theo Greminger protege in that you faded the rookie receiver to go get David Montgomery, but ultimately drafted Brock Bowers. I just can't make it up. That was so perfect. Oh, my God. Larkey and Greminger so proud of exactly what you just did there. It's so cool. All right. Now, how do you value a Bo Nix? Because I just can't get over Bo Nix. I think that he is one of the most bustarific quarterbacks I've ever seen. He was drafted by a bustarific dictator coach GM on a team that is probably a decade away from being competitive. It's such a catastrophe. But Bo Nix needs to be drafted in Superflex at a relatively high slot. The question is, where in Superflex are you comfortable with Bo Nix? Because I think this is an interesting question. If someone wants to just avoid him because of the bust risk, I totally understand it. You have these guys for their careers. But just know that, for me, after Xavier Worthy, Bo Nix needs to be in play.
I'm with you. And the other thing is you don't have to like these quarterback profiles in terms of Bo Nix and Michael Penix to realize that these guys are values. And they are someone who likely gives you an out going into even year one or year two for greater value. Bo Nix's ADP off the top of my head is about 112. Michael Penix is around 202. They both need to be drafted there, which first of all, just looking at value, that's the cheapest that a first round quarterback has been since Jordan Love, for reference. And Jordan Love, while this isn't a one-for-one comparison, he basically held pretty steady with basically as low as you drafted him, maybe got a little bit lower, and now we see where Jordan Love is. Even if Jordan Love didn't have the greatest season as he did, his value is still likely much higher. So let's take someone like Bo Nix, you could draft him at the 112, and you don't have to love the profile. He's got immediate opportunity to be the starter. What happens every time that there's a starting quarterback, especially rookie? All it takes is Broncos say Bo Nix is our starting quarterback, which is going to happen this year. With the other guys they have around him, it's going to happen at some point this year. What happens? Oh, well, then we see the value start to rise. Let's take Will Levis, for example, who was drafted in the 2nd round last year. And again, you don't have to like the profile. Will Levis had that one game, but the other peripherals around it were not great. What's happened
His
to Will
value's
Levis'
gone
ADP?
up.
It's gone all the way up.
Gone up, dude.
All it takes is a young quarterback to be announced as the starter, which is going to happen. It's inevitable for someone to be drafted in the top 12 and just never start games. They're going to start games. And then someone like Penix, even if it takes a little while, the only of 32 quarterbacks selected in the top 12 between 2006 and 2022, every single one has started a full season worth of games aside from Trey Lance. And you can't use the Trey Lance comparison in this because the whole thing with Trey Lance is, well, actually, we never even really saw him in college, let alone as a Power 5 level. And so we had no idea. It was the ultimate mystery bag, which I had been burned by, but that's aside from the point when looking at these guys, because Penix, Nix, started a ton of games at the Power 5 level, and even someone who had the second least amount of games started was Josh Rosen, who started 17 games. All it takes is a young quarterback to start, and again, as rookies, they get all these exceptions, and their value could stay afloat. Zach Wilson had essentially the worst rookie season you've ever seen, and his value stayed afloat going into year 2.
It's true. It's true. It's also true, per our fearless producer, Tyler Knable, Brian Thomas's over-under this year is 800.5 yards. What? That's just one of the easier unders I've ever seen.
I feel like that's actually pretty easy considering.
I mean, you mentioned Quentin Johnston in the same breath.
I mean, you could take someone like Malik Neighbors, who probably cannot have that much higher of an over-under than they're giving if his is 800. There's no way that Malik Neighbors should be totally asinine, way better in terms of his over-under. And you could come away from year 2 loving Malik Neighbors. And if he has 800-something yards but good peripherals, you're going to be all over it. So, yeah, I mean,
I love the idea of taking the 2 LSU guys, going over on Neighbors, who is in a worse quarterback situation, and then under on Brian Thomas, where you're just playing the probabilities on a rookie wide receiver. But Neighbors is that good, and he's going to get so much volume that the beauty is he could deliver on that over-under even with an inefficient season. Brian Thomas, to get to 800 yards, is going to have to be very efficient. And for a rookie, that's just very difficult to do. So, yeah, Brian Thomas. Oof.
Not to get off track here. I know we didn't have too much Malik Neighbors talk that's going to be going on, but Malik Neighbors is someone who he can have, first of all, he can have the not great in terms of rookie production and still be just fine. Like I use Drake London as an example. He held his value. He's a top 20 wide receiver. He hasn't done anything. Kirk Cousins comes to the team. All of a sudden, we're talking about a guy who's fringe round 1 in underdog ADP, despite never actually producing near that level, just because we've seen the peripherals and the quarterback situation coming in. The other thing with Malik Neighbors, even if that's your absolute floor outcome, is that Malik Neighbors not just hoping for a better situation. Unlike Drake London, Malik Neighbors, when you look at his peripherals, awesome yak guy. And people are somewhat afraid of Jaden Daniels. Part of the reason that you see in terms of worried about Jaden Daniels is because of Malik Neighbors' screen ability and the amount of screens that he got at LSU. You're telling me that Brian Daboll is not going to be putting things up for Malik Neighbors, who should slot in instantly, essentially as the wide receiver 1 in terms of volume on the Giants. He has elite yak ability, something that is going to help anybody in poor situations. And he's someone who has thrived off the screen game and gotten tons of production off of the screen game. And he has Brian Daboll chalking things up for him.
Well, KMG King in the chat says that the Brian Thomas and Quentin Johnston are completely different guys. Their film is completely different. And that's true. That's true that Brian Thomas won more on the outside. He didn't have to be schemed as many touches as Quentin Johnston. That's very fair. But there are just other parallels that we're talking about, generally speaking, that are worrisome for Brian Thomas. I hope Brian Thomas does great. I think he's a fun player. I love players that run a sub 4.4 40 with size. I think that's really cool. And I'm a fan. Generally speaking, I'm a fan of his. It's just that I've seen too many things. I've seen too many Josh Doxsons. I've seen too many Corey Colemans. I've seen too many Laquan Treadwells. I've seen too many Quentin Johnstons. And I'm not sorry. N'Keal Harry, the list is so long that this May hype that you get every single month of May for all these rookie drafts, and everyone just drafted the guy, and they feel the warm feeling, the warm tingling sensation of getting that guy and what might be, and you end up loving everybody. And how dare you talk about the bust risk of all these players that people love, right? How dare you talk about this idea that there's no way Marvin Harrison can possibly pay off at like the 1-2 turn in Bestball. Like, could you even, man? How could you even? Like, I don't think with Kyler Murray, even though Kyler Murray did deliver for DeAndre Hopkins a truly elite season, it's just very difficult for me to imagine, a quarterback that's not a proper pocket passer putting Marvin Harrison in a position that he could really burn you in best ball by avoiding him. I just can't. I don't see how, like, the opportunity cost at the 1-2 turn. It's the steep ask, man. It's a steep ask to tell me I had to go push the button to Marvin Harrison Jr. there. Anyway,
I mean, Marvin Harrison Jr., you could think is the greatest wide receiver. You could even think that he'll have the greatest wide receiver career of all time. I dare you to look up the greatest wide receivers of all time and then look what they did their rookie season. It's crazy. I mean, I know guys are getting more involved now than they used to be, but not to a level where a 1-2 turn is going to pay off unless he basically has one of the best rookie seasons we've ever seen.
Yeah, I mean, I have said I can't believe we're almost at our anniversary. We're going to have a big anniversary celebration soon. 10 years. 10 years of, 10 years of, you don't have to draft guys at their ceiling. They could be great, and you just don't. Why draft a guy at his absolute ceiling? Why do that? I don't do that. Just don't do that. There's some rules. You just don't do that. Jonathon Brooks versus Trey Benson. Who you got?
This was a top 50 pick. Trey Benson went in the 3rd round. Jonathon Brooks, his best season was his junior year, and he posted a 45.2% carry percentage, 2.75 yards per team rush attempt, and a 7.8% target share, which his target share is actually somewhat intriguing given other round 2 players that we've seen at the running back position. It's on the upper half of receiving production. The other thing is Trey Benson's best season, his senior year, where he posted a sub 40% carry percentage, 2.11 yards per team rush attempt, and just a 6% target share in his best season, where he was a year older than Jonathon Brooks was. And the other thing is Jonathon Brooks goes into a situation, no one thinks Chuba Hubbard is a world beater. Everyone knows Miles Sanders is not the guy for the Panthers. James Conner has consistently been a just fine heavy workload player. And in a rookie season where they drafted a 3rd round guy, you shouldn't expect James Conner to just disappear.
So the answer is Jonathon Brooks.
Yes.
By a lot?
By like, I would consider taking Jonathon Brooks early to end of round 1 in rookie drafts, and I would not consider Trey Benson there.
All right, so your video is jamming up on me. I'm going to try to see if I can fix it. Well, that didn't fix it. And I don't know why this is happening, but you're basically, we just have a still image of you, and we're going to keep going with a still image of Ian Miller, and sometimes these things just sort of correct themselves over time, and we'll see what happens. But for now, I just have more questions. Jaylen Wright, I love him, and are you able to get him in rookie drafts?
I wish that I was able to get more Jaylen Wright because of the things we talked about. He finds the best possible landing spot. He's someone he hasn't been a high carry percentage back, and yet there's been productivity that he got at Tennessee. And now he goes into the ultimate situation where that can be true. The problem that I have with Jaylen Wright right now in rookie drafts is I would love to take the guy, but he's going in the 2nd round of rookie drafts, despite not being in the top 3 rounds of the NFL draft. And day 3 guys, even at the running back position, can scare you a bit, and not someone that I want to be taking in the 2nd round. Like, I wish that the fantasy community did not do this to me because I want to be higher on a day 3 guy than other people, but it just feels like it's almost been taken too far.
I know. The thing is that the snap ADP soon after the draft had him in the 3rd round. And then it quickly, with light speed, it corrected on him because everyone's like, yeah, this guy has incredible upside given the landing spot. It's just we're talking about one injury to 2 guys that have had injuries already. We look at Devon A-Chain, multiple injuries last year. Also, Kyren Williams, multiple injuries. I want to make sure I mention that the ankle and the hip injury for Kyren Williams. So, sure, you could hope that a guy and look forward to a guy being a primary back, but be careful what you wish for sometimes. That's true with Kyren Williams. The nice thing about A-Chain is, though, that they don't have to necessarily give him a full workload, but they'll be tempted. They're going to be tempted, and then he can get injured, and then in steps Jaylen Wright and goes nuclear, and there's a very good chance Jaylen Wright outproduces Trey Benson this year. Right? That's the thing. I still like Trey Benson. I think Trey Benson offers a lot, and I'm I could be wrong. I could be wrong that the team drafted him thinking this is the end of James Conner. And then I've been proven wrong in this case before, where I've been a little bit early. Like, investors do this. Like, they see the writing on the wall with trends, and they jump out to best case scenario on a company, and then it takes an extra quarter, 2 or 3 for that company to really start delivering the earnings, and then then the stock comes back down. So I fear that's what's going to happen with Trey Benson. Trey Benson's one of those guys where his dynasty value could fluctuate in the summer with camp and with all the news that comes out of Arizona from the beat reports, where we know where Jonathon Brooks is going to land, right? In terms of, final ADP, where he's going to be drafted. It's a difficult situation to be in on a bad team that doesn't score touchdowns, but there's not the competition that you have like an established stud like a James Conner there, even though he's getting old and broken and inefficient. There's loyalty, right? There's incumbent loyalty to a James Conner that just isn't there with a Chuba Hubbard. That's why we're going to have to just monitor camp news and don't be surprised if there's some movement on the dynasty rankings as we process new information as the Bayesians that we are that comes in on Trey Benson. So his ranking's a little more fragile than Jonathon Brooks. That's what I'll say. What about Xavier White and Dylan Lobby in that Las Vegas backfield? What do you think of that?
I think it's a very interesting backfield, to say the least. I think part of it is that I'm not a big Xavier White guy, especially for where you kind of see his ADP going in terms of guys who are a bit more established, guys who we should expect volume and production from. But I have 2 worries with Xavier White before getting into Dylan Lobby. Xavier White is someone who has never handled a workload. At Georgia, his highest carry percentage was under 40%, and his highest target share was under 3%. Now, granted, there's a lot of competition at Georgia, and he doesn't have competition as much in Las Vegas, but that's still a worry because guys that handle workloads in college are more likely to handle workloads in the NFL. Even if he was the next guy right after Josh Jacobs, there's still that worry. The other thing that I have is that we could chase these guys, but without offensive efficiency or offensive production as a whole, it's hard for these guys to truly pay off with strong production, because no one should be expecting the Las Vegas Raiders to have high-end production in 2024, especially when there's a good chance that their rushing production actually takes a step back. And someone like Xavier White, who we can't fully say is going to be the guy or have a history of him being the guy, it's a lot harder to say. The thing with Dylan Love is I like Dylan Love. He's someone who I'm taking in round 4 of rookie drafts because, yes, of course, there's always going to be a risk with a 6th-year guy out of New Hampshire. I mean, that's clear.
No. But, is he a 6th-round guy for New Hampshire?
Or 6th-year guy. Did not mean 6th round.
He's not a first-rounder from LSU? No?
So there's always going to be risk, but the risk is quite clearly baked in. He's as close to free without being free as you can get. And the thing that you like about Lob isn't that, he handled this workload. He handled a lot of rushing production for New Hampshire. Sure, I hope a guy does that when he's at New Hampshire, when he's a senior, 5th year, 6th year. The thing that even 5th year and 6th years don't get to is that the guy was an animal as a receiver out of the backfield. 15.4% target share and 20.7% target share in his last 2 years at New Hampshire. Those are the kind of things that can get me intrigued, even with guys who are 6-year players at smaller schools, especially in a backfield where we just talked about with Xavier White, doesn't actually have a firm grasp on any of the backfield. And we just talked about Xavier White. His highest target share ever at Georgia was 2.6%. Dylan Lobb's worst was much better than that. In his final 3 seasons, above 10%, above 15%, and then above 20%.
20%.
That's the kind of intrigue that I like with Dylan Lobb.
I mean, Danny Woodhead was a workhorse at Chadron State, and that wasn't any reflection of what his opportunity share would be in the NFL by any means. What about wide receiver? After Xavier Worthy, give us a rookie receiver you feel pretty confident about. It's not Brian Thomas. Who is it?
I wish I felt confident about a rookie wide receiver, if that counts as any sort of an answer. But, I mean, you obviously have your top 3 you feel the most confident about. Xavier Worthy is the latest guy I would say that I have confidence in, because I would say this second round of rookie wide receivers is one of the worser that it's been in recent years. It's not great. There's not a single guy where I say, oh, I have confidence in that guy. That being said, someone like a Ricky Pearson, Xavier Legette, again, I don't love the profiles. I'm telling you right now that I don't love any of the second round rookie draft profiles for the wide receiver position really at all. But the fact that Ricky Pearsall and Xavier Legette, who are drafted in the first round, are going closer to Troy Franklin in rookie drafts than they are to the guys who is drafted closer to in the first round is something that I just see Xavier Legette, Ricky Pearsall there at 206, 207, 20, even touching 209. I go, okay, well, first round rookie wide receiver, I'll take that. First round rookie wide receiver that got drafted to the 49ers, I'll take that. Even if I do not love the profile.
Congratulations, you just wasted a draft pick. There's no good answer. No. Right? It doesn't exist. And in fact, the one guy that you mentioned, it could be someone you can trust to get targets is going to be Troy Franklin. It's crazy. But to me, I like Roman Wilson. I think Roman Wilson has a clear path to the number 2 receiver job there. Allen Robinson is dust, right? Calvin Austin is a one-dimensional field stretcher. Roman Wilson was a total beast at the Senior Bowl, was drafted by a team that has a great history of drafting day 2 receivers. I like Roman Wilson. I think he's the one guy that I have confidence. I have more confidence in Roman Wilson than I do Brian Thomas or Keon Coleman, that in 5 years we're going to look up and he's still going to be on an NFL field producing.
I think that's totally fair.
Any deeper sleepers than Roman Wilson? If you look past Roman Wilson, maybe into day 3, any sleepers you like?
So I guess before day 3, Jalen Polk, who I don't actually love all that much, but it's another situation where we have a top 40 pick who's going at the very end of the second round. And I've been in a draft where I went in the 3rd round. And I don't think really anyone who's drafted in the top 40 of the NFL draft should really be going that low. Even if you do not love the profile, which we've mentioned, we do not love the profile, but you have to say the NFL likes this guy enough to take him 37th overall. I probably shouldn't take him 37th overall in my rookie draft. That's just my feeling of it. But if we do day 3 guys, there's running backs that I like. We already talked about Dylan Lobb. Ray Davis is another one who had high-end efficiency, high-end workload at multiple colleges, and is someone who landed in the Buffalo Bills spot, who can essentially just straight away take the Latavius Murray role, who had production last year, especially spike week production, because they don't trust James Cook inside the 5-yard line. They've shown us that last year, and they put Latavius Murray in there. You got a bigger back in Ray Davis, who's shown some things as well and is much younger, and it essentially steps right into that Latavius Murray role. And then someone like Bucky Irving and Kamani Vidal are the other guys that I like. Vidal is someone who was a bell cow at college, who's going into a situation where they're likely going to run the ball a lot based on what we can expect from the Los Angeles Chargers offense. And there's not a clear-cut running back one up to this point. And those backfields that are likely to be on good offenses where you don't really know, and then you have a bell cow coming in, those are the type of upside shots that I like making.
Yeah, I mean, Vidal's the best one by far, easily, right? I mean, we're talking about, when you look at Bucky Irving and Vidal, Rachaad White on one hand, then you got Gus Edwards on the other, please. Bucky Irving's a 0. He's never going to be anything, even if Rachaad White picks up an injury, and he's been super durable so far. Bucky Irving's not going to be a primary back in the league. So that I think that's a wasted pick. There's not many running back wasted picks. I love just hammering running back in rounds 2, 3, 4, 5. The one guy I would just not draft is Bucky Irving. But the Tyrone Tracy to me is the guy I would much prefer. So Tyrone Tracy and Dylan Lobby, between those guys plus Vidal, I mean you're gonna get at least a couple running backs at great value in rookie drafts. Absolutely. At tight end, I really like Jatavian Sanders. I love the spot where he landed. I like the profile. I love that he came from a place with lots of target competition. What do you think of Jatavian Sanders?
I'm definitely a bit more worried than I was a couple months ago. I was into the profile a couple months ago. Then we see the athleticism slip up, and then it's not as intriguing, I would say, especially at a position where athleticism matters the most of all positions and does have correlation to success. And Jatavian Sanders, while there was other things he did well, the speed and height-adjusted speed score were not ideal for someone of his stature from what we expected, I should say. And the profile is solid to okay. And then the NFL took him, again, first round of the fourth round, but still not. It doesn't get me over the hump in terms of you're comparing this guy to he's going earlier than the Ray Davises, earlier than the Dylan Lobbies, earlier or around the same point as the Kamani Vidals. And that's a tough pill for me to swallow, especially knowing that for these running backs to gain value or you get value out of them, you don't actually have to see a full season of success. You don't have to see even great peripherals at the end of the season. You have to see spurts. Spurts at the running back position are what will drive value higher than fourth and third round rookie pick value. With Jatavian Sanders, you do have to see fine peripherals, especially as a rookie tight end. You shouldn't be expecting all that much, but one that went in the fourth round, the athleticism was a concern. Jatavian Sanders is a concern for me and not my favorite pick in rookie drafts.
Well, I don't draft him. I only draft running backs predominantly, and that's why. Like, if I have to, right, if I have to find a guy that I might pick, like a Jatavian Sanders, a guy I can talk myself into, if you say, hey, you can't draft a running back here, he's interesting, right? I like the spot. Generally speaking, who could be the tight end 2 from this class? I think he's in play. I think it's pretty clearly Sinnott, but it's then Sanders, and I think he could be fine. But what you just laid out is the system that we already have, that we've been talking about for 5 years, which is close your eyes and take the best available running back, and then go win championships. That's what you should be doing. Because everyone I throw at you, whether it's a receiver, whether it's a tight end, you throw them right back at me, right? So I'm like, just fine, Ian. Just take the goddamn running back, as we always do, and we'll move on. Who are you truthering for? Who do you have deep in your dynasty rosters or your taxi squads that you're not dropping?
I mean, first of all, if you look at my dynasty rostership, it's probably going to be similar because it's a bunch of random running backs that you just attached to. Like, the worst thing that I know this is getting off the topic of truthering, but when I look at
this is big. This is strategy talk, very big.
When I look at rosters of other people's, a lot of the times I'll see you go to their bench. So they have their lineup filled out. You go to their bench, and they have twice the amount of wide receivers as they do running backs. And my only question is why? Because one, you're leaving more running backs, more value specs, more like. Tell me how many times you put the fourth round rookie wide receiver just in your starting lineup. Then tell me how many times you've seen a fourth round, fifth round rookie running back in a starting lineup at some point in the season, because injuries happen, and then all of a sudden this guy gets catapulted. Or even if you're someone who's like, I don't want him in my starting lineup, I'm not competing. How many times near trade deadlines, near the playoffs, or if you don't have a trade deadline, into the playoffs, was there these running back injuries, and all of a sudden you just traded him for a second round pick? I got Keaton Mitchell on a couple teams, deep stash, will rebuild their teams. You're trading him for a second round pick.
Perfect.
Because people are like, oh, I just – the Ravens running back situation, it's a mess right now, and Keaton Mitchell looks great. That's all it took for you to get a second round pick for the guy that you spent fab on.
Yeah, or a fifth round or whatever. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
This is what we're talking about, man. It should be flipped. You want to spend those earlier picks on wide receiver, so then you can have twice as many running backs as receivers.
Yes.
On your bench in your taxi squad in Dynasty. That is the right way to build a team. I'll get you out of here. Bold prediction for 2024.
Bold prediction. Rashee Rice finishes as a wide receiver 1 in terms of points per game in 2024. That'll be the bold prediction, right?
Hey, I want to take a moment to thank you for tuning in. It's important to me that all of our media be free. This is only possible because of you allowing a true independent sports media enterprise to thrive unlike any other in the business. So please subscribe to the All In Package to continue to make all of this possible, to ensure that all of our stats, information, data, content is available to you, especially you, the people that get the site and get the show.